All right, so let's get started here. In this section, what we're going to be doing is I'm playing back my working on the Substance Painter portion at a increased speed. And we're going to be going through, and I'm just going to be kind of explaining the workflow as I'm going for the Substance Painter portion. So what's happening right now in this very first part is I'm going through, you can see that each shading group comes in loaded into Substance Painter there on the left. And I'm going through into each section and I'm making sure I've got my maps baked out that I need. And so I'm turning off a couple of them, the ID and the regular normals. Substance Painter tends to use only world space normals anyways, so I'm saving a little bit of time by going in and only baking what I need. I really enjoy using Substance Painter as a bit of an exploratory use. The Smart Material presets that are available online, and I actually pay for their subscription, which is actually pretty affordable in the grand scheme of things for some people. And so the preset materials can be really amazing to just drop in and see how they look. And that's kind of what I start out by doing here. And I do actually have my reference image that I painted, and I'm got that up on my other monitor. And so I'm really just going in and making sure that I'm, have a good idea of where I'm headed with this, and that I can really see the entire thing come together very quickly. And that's really the beauty of Substance Painter. You can see here I'm able to paint by shell or by object right there, and I can just really quickly lay in this black shader, this kind of powder coated metal shader that I really liked, and I'm just getting that in there and laying it in and seeing how it looks. So now this brass old shader looks really cool, so I'm able to go in and get that applied to the pieces that I want it on. And that's really this initial part, is going through and getting, these base shaders kind of blocked out. And the quality is so good on a lot of these shaders that there may actually be very little that I end up going and doing. Once I get every single shader assigned, then there is going to be stuff that I want to go in and actually paint in the software. So I know for a fact I'm going to go in on the beak and paint some scratches, and then I want to go in and hand paint the designs on the body of the bird. I always try to go in and get this stuff arranged so that I can bounce into Mari if I need to. As much as I love Substance Painter, it's really not quite there because it's such new software. I do feel that there are certain things that from a hand painting standpoint, from a projection standpoint, that I do prefer to do in Mari. In this section here, I ended up spending a lot of time on the leather, and in the coming sections of this video, you'll actually see me really dialing the leather quite a bit. To be honest, it may actually get a little bit edited out just for time's sake, so you're not sitting watching me tweak the same leather shader over and over. If you find that valuable and it's edited out, I apologize in advance, but I think there's definitely more valuable content, that is. So you can see, once I kind of get this to a good spot, I'm going to be able to go in and start tweaking these shaders one by one. So yeah. So you can see a lot of what's going on here with this leather. It was definitely one of the most problematic pieces, and I just couldn't find a smart material that I liked out of the box. So I went in and I actually started combining a lot of them together. I took advantage of the shaders that Substance Painter shipped with, and then I got some off of their website as well. And I really just started going in, and you can see here I'm starting to just try and get my own version of leather shader built. So if you haven't ever used Substance Painter before, these smart materials are all built off of layering multiple materials together and having different masks that are created.
It's a really big part of Substance Painter, these masks, and they're all amazing in what they can do. And you can see there I actually have you can see that's metal edge wear, and they all will take different combinations of maps and inputs. Sometimes they'll have ambient occlusion affect them, sometimes they'll be based off world space normals, and sometimes curvature. Actually, really commonly curvature and AO at the very least. And you can go in and use them all over and hold out different shaders. I'm going to actually end up going back to that leather a little bit. And you can see here I'm just kind of dropping in some really basic shaders on the interior pieces of the eyes, going through and populating that old brass shader around again. And I also, as I was doing this, started noticing some problem areas as well, which you'll see me go in and fix. There's a little artifact on the side piece of leather there. And so these legs, the legs had a lot of different materials on them, and I'm doing a lot of copying and pasting here, and that's also another one of the just phenomenal parts of Substance Painter, is just the ability to just copy and paste your shaders around wherever you need them. And so I can just copy and paste that brass old shader, and that's a shared material across a lot of pieces, and then I can just paint them in by object. Same thing with that metal hammered metal shader. That's kind of that black, dark metal. And I'm going to be doing a little bit of painting coming up here on that piston that we're looking at right now. I wanted to go in and have a little bit of like a oil stain on it. And so I'm trying to find a good shader to use with that, and I'm going to layer it in. So you can see there's a black, darker shader, and I added a mask. And I'm going to try and put a generator on it with a little bit of noise or grunge, so I can get something in there as a base. And then I can go in and I can add a paint mask on that as well, so that I can get in and paint the exact thing that I want to have. So you can see I've found a grunge texture that I like, and I can dial that around, and you can see I'm trying to figure out how to project that and rotate it around, and I'm messing with the UVs until I can get something that feels kind of like that dripped oil. And I had to go in and make sure that it wasn't affecting the bump. You can see right there I turned off the height on this shader, and that's really it. So now I'm, even just right now with that kind of procedural look, I'm getting something pretty cool. And I can go in and, I can mess with some of the different colors on that. And now I'm going in with my paint mask, and I'm just going to paint a little bit so that the areas where that piston is really not ever going to be going in and out, it's a little bit cleaner. There's a little bit of a gradient on it. I think a really important part of any texture painting process, whether it be procedural in Substance Painter or in Mari or whatever paint package you're using, thinking about the way materials and textures fall off is always going to be an essential part of the process. And so what I mean by fall off is really that idea that things happen over time. Rust will build up, dirt will build up, and it will tend to happen in these gradients across objects. Substance Painter does a beautiful job of that just procedurally, but you may want to go in and get something a little bit more refined as well just by painting. So a lot of what's going on now is getting the rest of the shaders assigned to the objects, and you can see here I'm going in and getting the tail set up, and I'm trying to figure out a look for the inside of the gears, and I end up this is another area that I really wanted to get right. You can see I'm going back and forth a lot on it, and I wanted to get something on the in-between area of the gears so that it wasn't totally hammered in. And then you can see right here I'm trying to figure out that color of that blue purple so that it stands out and can be that color that I have in my painting. And all of this stuff, right now at this current stage is work in progress. Another thing that is, by the way, so we've been I'm about, I don't know, 10 minutes in. So I've really only been working on the substance portion of this asset for 40 minutes total. That's one of the really amazing things about this, is that in 40 minutes, I have an asset that's, 70% of the way there. And of course, the expression always goes that final, 10% is the hardest. And in this case, there is going to be a fair amount of work to get it even from that 70% up to that, 90%. And all of these little details are going to be the most difficult part. It's going to require the most amount of painting. And along the way, you're going to notice little things, little shortcomings in the model that you need to take care of. In this case, I noticed there was some little penetration stuff I need to take care of. A lot of the interpenetration errors that you may run into are going to be extremely important to deal with in Substance Painter, because they're going to change the way your maps are picked out. So if something is penetrating through another object unintentionally, you're going to have to go back and rebake your maps and make sure everything is sorted. So you can see I'm kind of bouncing all over when I'm doing this, and it may feel like there's not really rhyme or reason to it, but there really is, and that's I don't like to own in on one area and refine it and refine it and refine it. I like to try and visualize the entire asset and bring it up to the same quality level together. So you can see I did a little bit of work on the eye there, and then now I'm going back and I'm working on this leather some more. And like I said, the leather was kind of bothering me throughout the whole period. So you can see here I'm just starting to layer up even more stuff to it. So you can see I'm modifying these edge detail procedurals that I've got going on, and I'm trying to get some sort of dirt buildup over top of the leather. And I get it to a certain place here, and I leave it be for a little bit, and then I decide to start working on some of the other pieces. So, it's all about going in and getting things feeling a little bit better, and going in and, refining one piece to a point where it feels pretty good, and going piece by piece. So you can see here I switched over to the body, and I wanted to get a little bit of rust on this. And so you can see the process is always the same here. I'm going in and I'm just dropping a rusty metal shader over top of the metal that I had to see if I get something different that I may like. And I actually end up deciding to do it myself, rather than, you can see there I dropped a rust material rather than a smart material. And so I'm actually going in and creating some of the edge wear and tear myself, because I was actually really happy with the way the steel scratched material was looking on the underneath. And so it's, I found that color of rust material that I liked, and now I can go in and mess with the procedurals and dial them in until I'm happy with it. And you can see I'm just, it's almost hard to narrate over so much of it, but it's really just a lot of fiddling around with this stuff. And I just try to not rush it. You can see there's definitely an evolution in the work that has to happen, and there's a lot of experimentation that has to go on, and that's really part of what I consider the look dev process as it is. You can also see I almost always am going back and trying other things, and especially with a program like Substance Painter, there's so many options available to you, and it's a very different state of mind to be in. Rather than painting, you're going in and applying these procedural patterns, and it's a lot less about what your actual Wacom pen is doing and more about what this algorithm is doing, and brainstorming of how you can utilize that and combine it in a different way. So this section here with the beak, I have this new brass shader, and so I want to dial those colors in. And what I wanted to do is have a, you can see I'm using a scratches brush there, and I wanted to show some of that clean brass underneath around the areas. So this is really one of the first instances where I get in and actually do some painting and, you know, start modifying this. And you can see there I had to turn up the texture resolution to 2K from just 1K because I wanted to be able to really see it. And, you know, I just have one clean brass shader, and I'm going in and I'm utilizing the dirt brushes and the scratches brushes, and I'm going in and just trying to get this worked out so that it feels like there's those, you know, bright colored scratches, brightly colored metal through the scratches. So the idea is that these, you know, these shaders or these materials in real life would be worn down this way. And, you know, there may be, you can see like that, there's a fresh scratch that goes over top, and then the brass kind of eats away at itself again. So after that, I'm going in and you can see after the rust got added, I started experimenting with adding some sort of, you can see there I'm calling it an oxidation. That's actually the name of the generator. And I'm just trying to get some of that oxidation in there so that it feels like there's a bit of a film over top of everything. And you can see the rust is still going over top of it, but I'm trying to just, and honestly, I don't totally remember if I ended up keeping this or not, but this was just one of those instances where I wanted to go in and get something a little bit different to help break up that texture a little bit. Because it felt like it was just very clean metal and then rust directly over top of it. So it felt like it was, you know, missing that little bit of additional color in there. So what's happening right here is, you know, again, I'm going and I'm looking at this and I'm thinking about what I'm getting in certain areas of that rust generator, and I wasn't totally happy with it. And so I'm going and I'm dialing the generator up and down, the procedural, and I'm getting it to a point that I'm kind of happy with most of it. And then I'm actually going to add in a paint mask, and I'm going to start going in, and you can see here I'm actually multiplying some noise over top of the really noisy generator. So there's actually the generator on the bottom layer there, and then there's a fill layer that's multiplied through that with a noise, and then there's another generator going over top of that that's going to hold it out in an even different way. So you can see as I switch that around to like metal edges instead of the fill of the noise and stuff. So all of these are going to be working together to go in and get something that was a more complex look than what I had previously. And, you know, you can see it's like every little thing really has to get dialed one by one. And, you know, so you can, it's a really kind of an interesting process when you're thinking about it. It's really pretty difficult. You know, it's what goes much further past that one single button click of dragging and dropping a shader in. And I think that's a really important part of this, is that you do need to spend, you know, that same amount of time going in and dialing all of these materials. And it's, you know, it's important to know that just because you have all these amazing presets, that you do need to go in and spend that time to go in and dial all of those pieces. So you can see right there at the very end, I just multiplied that last mask and held out everything else and got something a little bit different. So right here, copy pasted again. I copied that clean brass shader onto the chest piece here. And now I'm going in and I'm using my scratches brushes and the dirt brushes again. And I wanted to get the same look that I had on the beak on some of the other brass pieces. And so I need to go in and I wanted some, Also, I don't think I mentioned yet, you can see I'm rotating the light around. And when there's subtle changes to the specular, that's a really nice way to see what you're doing. And so this was an experiment that I went in with that metal edge wear, and I don't actually think I ended up keeping it, but I just wanted to see if I could use that as a way to really hold that out to only be on the edges, but I didn't end up using it. So here you can see when I was painting, I was actually painting through to the objects behind it. So I did need to go in and make sure that those other objects were held out from the mask, so that got all sorted. And you can see here I'm actually going in, I have that procedural turned off, and I'm choosing to just paint it instead. And I'm going in and just doing all of it manually instead of going in and, you know, having that procedural do the work for me. So super cool. So I'm just dialing in these edges, getting those kind of refined and the last little tweaks here and there. And I'm just kind of tumbling around the object, getting it checked out, and I'm actually going to be sending this, going back to Maya, doing some model updates, and then bringing that back into Substance Painter. So you can see here on the Maya side, there's just little stuff. You can see there I pulled a little edge around. There was some kind of funky stuff going on with the leather here, and I just didn't really like how much it was penetrating that metal. And I just really have to go in and, you know, piece by piece, we can just get that adjusted. And, you know, you can see here I'm bouncing back over to Substance Painter and really checking it all out. So you can see right there, it's going through the metal. And so I've, right here, what's happening is you can see if I look at that angle, I didn't really like that you could just see a hole down into there. So I wanted to try and modify the asset a little bit so that it felt a little bit better made, you know, so there wasn't just like this, there wasn't just this chunk of, you know, emptiness right there, but it would actually have a bit of you know, feeling like it was put together, so that our little scientist guy who made this thing had, you know, to go in and solder this so that plate of metal just wasn't sitting there. And so the new pieces also, just like anything, you have to make sure they're UV'd and that they're fitting into the correct way of working. And that's really it. It's a lot of just small changes here. So I'm going to cut out the rest of the video because it's just me pushing and pulling vertices around. Cool. So coming up, you can see here I got the seams mirrored to both sides, got them placed in UV space, and I'm about to prep this object. So something that's different this time is I'm actually going to bring a smoothed version into Substance Painter. Because I didn't have any actual sculpting detail, I wanted Substance to be able to see the modeled in edges, and, you know, because that detail is modeled in to be smoothed. And so rather than normal maps coming from ZBrush, they're just going to be coming in through smoothed geometry. So all of our UV shells have been moved back to 0 to 1 so that they play nice with Substance, because Substance does not support UDIMs at the time of creating this video. And I've gone in and I have re-imported the new smoothed OBJ, and I do have to go in and rebake all of the maps for all of these objects again. So you can see there the pieces are all fixed up. Looks like there's still a little bit of metal showing through on that piece of brass, but I think that's okay for now. And I'm going to cut through this section, but it's a lot of going through and just rebaking all of my maps again. Cool, so this is a picking up where all of the maps are baked for the new object, and what I want to do is I found a brushed aluminum shader that was pretty cool, and I was able to rotate the UVs so that they traveled along the, you know, this milled edge of this metal gear. And so I created a quick mask, and I wanted to just paint where that brushed metal was happening. This is another one of those examples of going in and utilizing multiple materials in Substance Painter, and just painting a mask, we're able to get a really amazing amount of detail. This is something that could be pretty difficult to just do by hand in shaders, and we're able to just paint the masks. It can get a little bit tricky. You can see here I'm actually having a pretty hard time getting in that area in between. This is one of the shortcomings of Substance Painter at the moment, and again, all of this stuff changes so rapidly. The way I would have needed to deal with this was be smarter about having those tail feathers and the gears be on the same shader. I would need to go in and have a way to isolate them based on material, and then I would be able to go in and paint them separately. So I would need the tail shader already assigned. You can see that right now I'm isolating only the tail shading group. And I can probably filter by object. I wasn't thinking about that at the time, but I just suffered through it instead and painted it until I had all of the pieces very delicately gone in and got them figured all out. So after this, we're going to do our first test of bringing our baked textures into Maya. So I realize I'm doing the voiceover here that I totally failed on recording the actual material export or texture export, but just so you know, there is a V-Ray preset now in Substance Painter that I used, and it works phenomenally. So I didn't really do anything other than use that preset. So you can see in the folder here, I've got all of the shading groups. You can see I've got normal, IOR, height, reflection, everything. And so a lot of what I'm doing right now, and I'm probably going to skip through a lot of this and just talk through creation of one, and we'll just cut out the rest until I've got them all assigned here. But you can see, started with the legs, and I'm just bringing in the IOR, the glossiness, reflection, normal map, and diffuse. And one of the key things, I've mentioned this, but I want to mention it again because it's pretty cool. The index of refraction shader is set up so that, the index of refraction texture is using the 0 to 1, where 1 is, actually 0.99 is, almost no reflection on the middle point, and 0 is a perfect mirror. So that's how it's able to bake out those IOR maps. So it's a little bit different than if you're using an actual IOR value of, say, like 5 or 3 or something like that. So that's it. So I got my bird legs connected, and you can see I'm using a free script here called File Texture Manager. It's available on Creative Crash. And I'm using it to search for something in the path. So you can see I'm searching for legs, and I am replacing it with tail. And then I'm connecting those same textures and duplicating the shader around. So I'm deleting the name and then resourcing all of the textures. So that's really it. Going in, you can see I'm, again, duplicating out that whole shader, renaming it to what it's supposed to be, connecting it into that shading group, sourcing the root and what I'm going to replace it with in File Texture Manager, and that to me was the easiest way without using a script for this demonstration of getting everything all connected. So I'm going to skip the rest of it and get forward to when we're doing some test renders here. All right, so all of my shaders are created, and I am actually going in and I am exporting this out to a new file just to kind of clear it all out. And now I'm actually going to copy that into a new folder that I'm just calling Publish, just for my own, just so I know which one, is the one I want to use in my references. And now I'm going back into our, file here using the LUT, and I'm on the backyard render layer, and I'm going to start doing some test renders. And it's pretty amazing how quickly it will come together. You can see that these test renders that I'm doing right now are almost one-to-one. And so I decided to use the V-Ray physical camera, so I had to dial the exposure settings. That's why it looked a little dark at first, but I wanted to play around with some depth of field. And if you happen to see the coming soon image, this was actually the file that coming soon image came from. And, it was just something that I was using this asset, and so this was the angle, and I had to just go in and, you can see I have the IPR running, and I'm able to get in there and just really play around with this and get something pretty cool out of it. Substance Painter really gained a lot of traction in my own personal workflow when they introduced the V-Ray presets and the Arnold presets for that matter also. Having the ability to go in and just export the maps and connect them into a shader and have everything work one-to-one is just amazing. You can see right there on the beak, I can see those scratches and the details coming through, and it looks beautiful. And so it's just all around been an extremely positive experience. And you can kind of see why. It's just, we're able to get this first pass render out super fast.